Welcome, AP Psychology students. This video is about Module 77, which is dealing with stereotypes, prejudice, discrimination. So we're going to look at the social factors, psychological factors, cognitive factors that could contribute to those things. So our central question, what causes people to label other groups of people and treat them differently, whether that's based on race or gender or social clique, whatever. There's some common themes that are present. So let's go. So first thing is we want to know the difference between some of these terms. They kind of get used interchangeably at times, but there's actually a little bit of a difference. So if we start over here, this idea of a stereotype, this is like a thought about a group. And a lot of times these are negative. They don't have to be, but oftentimes they are. So if we use a fictitious group of people, let's say purple people. So if you have a cognitive component here, you might say that purple people are bad drivers. You have a kind of a negative thought about that group. And then prejudice says affective component. So this is the way that you that somebody would feel about that group of people. So I don't like purple people. They make me disgusted, or whatever. Kind of a negative feeling about them. And then discrimination is the behavior. So because of the way I feel and think about purple people, I will not be friends with them, or I will not hire them to work at my business. So that would be discrimination. And so they're all kind of related, but they all kind of go together, but there's some differences there. It's easy for me to say this as a white guy, but this is just kind of going based on the research that's out there from social science that would say that compared to previous generations, in our country, that discrimination and prejudice are decreasing. I'm sure we still have a ways to go. We're not, perfect, but things are supposedly getting better. We also know that racism today is more subtle than in the past. It's not quite as much in your face, like yelling racial, epithets and stuff like that. Although that still happens, I'm sure. But apparently the argument is that for the most part, things are not quite as bad as they used to be. So what are some of the causes? So first we look at social roots of prejudice. One, this term here at the top, it's not in your book, but you should know it, ethnocentrism. So this is putting one's ethnicity at the center. So this could be not only race, but it could be ethnicity, it could be religion, it could be gender, so just any kind of group of people like that. So it's kind of belief that one's ethnic group is superior. And so just if you felt that way, that you would be considered ethnocentric, that if you feel like your group is better than others and that all other groups should be judged based on or in relation to yours. Yours is kind of the standard that others should be compared to. Another one is scapegoating. This is kind of like, when you're angry or upset about something, you displace that anger, that aggression, that frustration towards another group of people. And so, historically, this has happened a lot. You can see here on the slide, a lot of times prejudice tends to increase in places where resources are scarce, or if the economy is not doing great. Sometimes one group of people will look for another group of people to say, hey, they're to blame. And they'll push that blame onto them. One example, Nazi Germany pre-World War II, Jewish people were blamed for problems in Germany, before the war. But there's all kinds of examples of this. Another example, immigration. A lot of times immigration gets blamed. Throughout the world, different countries, they'll blame the incoming immigrants for economic problems, and there could be truth to it, whatever, given the situation, I don't know, but just the tendency to go to those people are to blame. That would be an example of scapegoating. Another thing kind of socially is this idea of in-groups and out-groups, which these are very simple terms. An in-group is a group that you are in. It's a group that you identify with. And so it could be race, It could be religion, it could be gender, but it could also be something as simple as like, I'm on the basketball team, or, I am in band or show. It's any group that you belong to. I work at Target. I'm a Target employee. And then an out group is someone who, it's a group that you do not feel a sense of membership to, you don't belong to. And so what the research says is that human beings, tend to have what's called in-group bias. We tend to have a preference for people that are in our in-group, whether that's based on race, religion, anything like that. And, they've even done studies where these in-groups are constructed. So it's like, hey, you're going to be on the red team, you're going to be on the blue team, and then they compete against each other. And it doesn't take long for in-group bias and preference to be created. So again, a lot of this is just it could be artificially constructed. So it could be race or religion, whatever, but it doesn't have to be those things. It's pretty straightforward stuff. Again, in-group bias, tendency to show preference for those in our in-group. This is kind of a controversial topic, but it does get talked about in the book, so I'll at least mention it. This idea of implicit bias. If you remember from earlier in the year, we talked about implicit memory, explicit memory, so kind of like a synonym for unconscious. Like, do people have unconscious biases towards other groups? And so they've done studies. This is mostly done through Harvard University, where they will bring people in, and you can see here on the slide, they might associate positive words with one race more quickly than with another race. And they might associate negative words with one race before another race. And so that's kind of their operational definition for having unconscious or implicit bias. This research is highly controversial. There are some people who believe in it. There are other people that think it's bogus. So you you can do your research. You can make the decision. If you Google, implicit racial test, whatever, you can find it online. You can look at it. You be the judge. And they've done some trainings where they try to, what can we do to limit implicit bias? And the outcomes have not been terribly effective, and so it kind of just begs the question of is this a real thing, and then also what do you do if it does exist? It's not really easily remedied. So I don't know, it's just interesting research, so you be the judge and make your own call on it. So a little bit of a checkpoint, pause and take a look, see if you can answer these. So what are some examples of cliques or in-groups at JHS? And then see if you can create an example of a stereotype, a prejudice, and a discrimination that seniors might exhibit towards sophomores at JHS. Pause it, and we'll come back. Looking at answers, there could be a million answers. Cliques could be, again, band, show choir, basketball team, football team. It doesn't have to be any of those formal things too. It could just be a certain group of people and like they hang out all the time, and that's a clique. That's an in-group. And then an example of a stereotype. Maybe you have a stereotype towards sophomores that, sophomores are immature. And you have a prejudice. You have a negative attitude towards sophomores. I do not like them. And then a discrimination could be, I will not hang out with sophomores. I will not let them, ride in my car, or I will not work with a sophomore on an assignment. So those would be an example of a stereotype, a prejudice, and discrimination. And then some cognitive theories of prejudice and stereotyping. So some of the things we talked about earlier this year. So one, the representativeness heuristic. So our brain's tendency to put things into concepts and prototypes. And so, if you're exposed to things throughout your life where it causes you to categorize people a certain way, maybe you have an early experience and you're like, oh, these purple people, when I think of, something bad, I think of a purple person. And so, this purple person becomes the prototype for this bad person. So you're making a judgment based on how well does something fit a prototype. Availability heuristic, vivid examples, maybe with a certain group of people, You had a bad experience and it's vivid in your mind. Oh, remember the time that vivid, that purple person, stole something from me, and now you think, all purple people are bad. And so you have that vivid example, it's fresh in your mind. And so because of that, that mental shortcut causes you to have prejudice. Some other research out there, the other race effect. Interesting, apparently human beings have a tendency to they're better able to see diversity of appearance in their own race, and they're less able to see diversity in other races. So it's kind of that tendency of like those people that aren't of my ethnicity or race, they kind of all look alike, at least to a larger extent. Which reminds me, when it comes to in-group bias, we have a tendency to be able to see more diversity in our in-group as opposed to out-group. So out-group, we look at them like, oh yeah, all those band people, they're all the same. But us show choir people, oh my gosh, there's so much diversity. We're here, So we're more able to see that diversity in our own in-groups. We've talked about just world bias. If we see groups of people that are struggling or not doing as well, we might say, well, they deserve their lower status. If they would just, work harder and do what they were told and do better, then, they would be doing better. And so because they are, struggling and they're lower socially, they must have done something to deserve it. And then the role of cognitive dissonance. We think about, the example here on the slide. So we live in a great country. It wouldn't discriminate against people who did not deserve it. So therefore, if our thoughts are, this place is great, we don't, have discrimination and stuff. So your behavior would, even, if you had another thought that didn't really match that, well, I think this, but I'm having this other thought that maybe doesn't align with that. Maybe you would adjust this attitude to say, no, things are great. And then that's, because of the cognitive dissonance, you could engage in just world bias or making some kind of internal attribution about that out group and why they are, not doing well. And then some of the stuff we've learned about in Unit 6, observational learning. Most prejudice, to some degree, it's probably learned by watching other people. So if other people that family, friends, etc., if you see prejudice from them, you hear things that they say, that can be taught. Which kind of leads to a final question of like, how do you prevent it? And it's not easy. But one thing, having contact with outgroups, other, diverse groups, ethnicities, genders, etc., like that. So having contact with them would reduce conflict amongst groups and lessen prejudice towards those groups. But even better than that is having situations where two groups have to work together on something and come together for a common purpose. That is even a next step up for helping reduce conflict and negative feelings amongst different groups of people. And so we don't have any easy answers, but those would be some things that could help. So this is just kind of a checkpoint. Take a second, see if you can answer these, see if you can match them up. That is a good place to stop for now. So hopefully you got a lot out of this, and we'll see you in class and we'll talk more about it. Thanks, guys.